Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. Got an extra long one for you tonight. We've got PQ River as Dr. Death. We've got Nancy Levonian telling a story that we sort of ran once before, but the ending got cut off and nobody even told me. So I have a fixed version of that we'll be running tonight, and it's never been animated before. It's going to be animated this time. So that should be exciting. I've got a really special announcement, something I'm very excited about. But first, there's this guy who asked me to give him a shout out, and I almost forgot. So let's look him up. What did he actually say to me? Sirens outside. The cops are coming to get me. All right, let's see. Palmer Shannon. That's the guy. He asked if I could give him a shout out, and I said yes. And he also claims that Dogman ran through his house. I'm sorry I'm laughing. He says it's true. It sounds like the way he wrote it, it sounds like he's joking. So maybe he's joking, but I don't know. But he claims it's true. He says, let's see, I went in my backyard and I saw a 7.5 to 8 foot tall upright walking canine. So if this gets featured on the next episode, you need to post this on the channel. And the story is called I Saw an Upright Walking Canid and It Chased Me Through My Home. But the thing is, he didn't mention the home part until the end. That's why I thought he was just making this up, so I have no idea. But he says it had amber eyes and human fingers, and this happened in Alabama. So, Palmer, if you're listening, please supply us with more details in the comments if you're for real. And if you're joking, that's fine too, because I'm a big Andy Kaufman fan, so it's cool with me either way. So, now, before we get to the first Dr. Death story, I have a very special announcement. You guys know that I appear at the, what is it called? The Northeast Comic Con up in Massachusetts near Boston. And in March, there's going to be a special St. Patrick's Day event, and there's going to be lots of stars there. Nicholas Brendan from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and people like that. But the big headlining guest is someone that's never been to one of Gary's conventions before. I'm very excited. It's comedian Gilbert Gottfried. Because who else do you want headlining a St. Patrick's Day? Okay, I'm not even going to go there. It's not safe to do ethnic jokes on YouTube anymore, but I was going to make an Irish joke, but let's just skip it. All right, so, the last hour of this episode was an episode just a few days ago by itself up here, and I deleted it because apparently some stuff I said in the beginning hurt some people's feelings, and I don't want to hurt people's feelings, so I just deleted that part, and that's the last hour of this one. So if you watched that the other day, you might want to skip the last hour of this one, just giving you some fair warning. And now, without any further ado, here's Dr. Death with our first Dogman story of the episode.
The Dogman Car Chase, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. I've got a story to tell you about a monster that might possibly be a Dogman or a Tulpa, or maybe both at the same time. This happened back in the 80s, and I was hanging with my buddies. It was right at the end of the summer, immediately before we all split up and went to college. American Werewolf in London had just come out, and we were driving home after having seen it down at the mall. My brother, Chino, not his real name, was driving. We were all talking excitedly over each other about the special effects and the monster in the film. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen before. I mean, we thought Lon Chaney Jr. was cool, so this absolutely blew our minds. It was a definite paradigm shift in terms of werewolf movies. We were describing visuals we were impressed by, and retelling funny lines from the film when Chino interrupted us and asked us what that thing was alongside the road up ahead. We all stopped talking and stared. It was the American Werewolf in London, except in New Jersey. It looked like an oversized prehistoric wolf. It looked like the movie. It had a long snout. It had immense fangs, the works. We drove by looking at it, and it looked at us in return. Somebody asked if that was a tie-in with the movie or something. Then it ran after us on its hind legs. We screamed. Chino screamed louder. "What's it doing? What's happening?" he screeched in a voice 2 or 3 octaves higher than normal. We all shouted that the thing was chasing us, and Chino hit the gas. I was thinking that it must be publicity for the movie. There was no other logical interpretation. The guy won't be able to chase us once we get up to speed. That's when he dropped to all fours and got serious about running after us. All hell broke loose in that car as we freaked out, insisting Chino drive faster and faster. But no matter how fast he got the car to go, the huge wolf ran faster. I watched it as it ran like a greyhound, but bizarrely faster than any dog or wolf should be able to run. It was catching up with us. There was a huge and long right turn coming up ahead, and Chino didn't think he could make it at the speed we were going. Without any warning, he hit the brakes, and we started the long process of skidding to a halt. The dogman, who was nearly about to overtake us when Chino hit the brake, sped past us on the highway and tried to also put the brakes on. His claws dug into the highway pavement, and I swear I remember seeing sparks shoot out. He spun out over the grass partition between the 2 sides of the highway and skidded past it and back into traffic directly into the path of an oncoming 18-wheeler. We all gasped in horror at the accident about to happen, then gasped in surprise a second later as the werewolf creature arrested its momentum and gracefully avoided getting hit, easily making it to the woods on the far side and avoiding injury. We once again erupted in shouts at Chino to drive, which he did, and we never saw the creature again. So how did this happen? I used to read Robert Anton Wilson back then, so I chalked it up to the cosmic trickster. Later, I read about tulpas in a book by John A. Keel. That led me to think maybe our intense imagination all focused on the same exact image of the werewolf in the movie, briefly but vividly manifested the creature in the consensual reality of the early 1980s. I mean, I guess it's also possible there's actually a giant wolf that can run either on all fours or on its hind legs like a man chasing cars through central New Jersey. It just seems more likely, to me personally, that something weird happened that night when we drove home from American Werewolf in London. I'll probably never know what the creature was that chased us that day, but in my gut, it was something different than a normal predator in the woods. To me, that was something that, for a lack of a better term, I will call paranormal. Addendum. I told my brother Chino that I had written this story up to be read by you, and he gave me further information that sort of rips my theories all to shreds. He says that later that same year, around Christmas time, he saw the same or a very similar creature on that same highway, but maybe about 10 miles north of where we first saw it. He says this time it was on the opposite side of the highway, and he doesn't think it noticed him. I asked Chino if he had been thinking about the werewolf or dogs or anything like that before he saw it, like we were the first time. He said he was listening to the radio and thinking about how he wished he could date Cyndi Lauper. So I guess the wolf wasn't a tulpa, at least not that second time. I asked Chino why he never told me this story before, and he reminded me that I didn't come back home for Christmas that year. There was all this personal family stuff going on that I'd rather not get into, but anyway, we actually didn't see each other for over a year back then, so by the time we did get to hang out, I guess the second Dogman sighting was old news. It certainly wasn't as memorable as the first one. I asked him if he could describe the creature in any detail, but all he remembered was that it looked to him the same as the first one we saw that chased us. So, who knows? Maybe all Chino saw was the dying reflection of the tulpa we had all generated that earlier day after seeing the movie. Or maybe an upright, walking, carnivorous canid really does walk the woods of New Jersey after all.
Catholic School Werewolf, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Nancy Levonian. This happened in my last year of Catholic school before I went away to college. It was the late 1970s in an area just north of New York City that I don't want to name. This particular school I went to, if I described it in any way at all, you'd immediately know which one I was talking about. So I have to leave a lot of details out. If you knew who I was referring to and asked them if it were true, I would expect at least most of them, if not all of them, would deny any of this was real. They'll have more reason to be concerned if people think they're crazy. I don't care what anyone thinks, so I'm going to tell you the story about the Dogman we saw, which we later learned was actually a werewolf. I had two best friends back then. Let's call them Mary Catherine and Annalisa. We would all wear identical shoes, as tall as the school would allow, and roll our socks down, as low as the school would allow. We had similar hairstyles. We talked alike. If we didn't have our different faces, we would have been the same person in triplicate. We were like our own little gang, and we liked it that way. We experienced a number of things that we hadn't shared with anyone else. The time we saved a duck stuck in some netting in a stream. The time we donated money we had raised turning in bottles and cans to that orphanage. The time we saw a Dogman. Oh, that's right. We were alone, just the three of us, in a park near the school. It was getting dark and we had been there longer than we should have been. As we were about to leave, I saw it, walking along the tree line. I pointed it out to the others and they saw it as well. What we saw was a dog or a wolf. It had gray and silver fur and it looked like an oversized wolf in all ways except that it walked on its hind legs. It was hunched forward a little bit with its front paws held in almost a praying position, but it was still walking on its hind legs, almost like a human. We watched it walk back into the woods and swore each other to secrecy about what we had seen. The outside world never mattered to us at all. We only ever cared what the other two of us thought, ever. We were the ultimate trio. But in the last year of school, Annalisa had gotten close with this boy. Let's call him Jimmy. I didn't really know if he was cool or not, since she never brought him around to meet us, or brought us around to meet him. We were seeing less of her than we would have preferred, and even when we did see her, she had become a lot less open. So one time, Mary Catherine and I were hanging out in the park near school that was right by a forest. We were talking and walking when Mary Catherine shushed me and pulled me down with her behind a bush. She pointed out what caused all of this, and as I squinted off into the distance, I saw Annalisa and Jimmy. They thought they were alone, and they were having a conversation about something. Mary Catherine and I decided silently to get as close as we could to that couple. We were so starved for knowledge about our friend that we were willing to do anything to get a little more information. We snuck around in the woods until we were as close as we were ever going to get. Then we huddled down and got as quiet as we could, and we listened. Annalisa was asking Jimmy to show her something and to do something, but Jimmy was refusing. Both Mary Catherine and I raised our eyebrows at that, then went back to listening. What was she asking him to show her? What did she want him to do exactly? So finally, he stood up and seemed more annoyed than before. He started telling her that he might hurt her if he showed her and that it wasn't worth it. She said she didn't care. She needed to see it with her own eyes. Mary Catherine and I were basically in gossip heaven. We had no idea what was coming, but we knew this was going to be a doozy. Finally, Jimmy relented and agreed to whatever it was that Annalisa was begging him for. I know I was nervous. I wasn't sure I was really going to be happy with whatever was about to be revealed. As we peeked out of the bushes, the boy began to twitch and gyrate, as though something were wrong with him. I was wondering where exactly this was going when Jimmy screamed in pain. Mary Catherine and I were so surprised by this that we were now hugging each other from our hiding spot. I know at that point, I was wishing I could have been anywhere but there. But we couldn't take our eyes off the scene playing out in front of us. Jimmy fell forward onto the ground and began changing in appearance, seeming to grow from inside, bubbling up into something larger. With an intense scream, hair or fur sprang out of his body all at once, different lengths all over. He screamed again and the fur evened out. It was silver and gray fur, like the dogman we had seen. He reared back up on his hind legs and screamed once more. Jimmy was the dogman we had seen that night. We had watched him transform into this lichen creature, this upright walking canid, right in front of our eyes. That meant he wasn't a dogman, though. That meant he was a werewolf. After fully transformed, he looked all around, then focused on Annalisa like he hadn't noticed her there before. We could hear him growl and saw his fur stand on end. He crouched down as though he were about to pounce on her, and I was frozen in fear. Should I do something? Before I could think, Mary Catherine grabbed a rock and threw it in a direction behind the dogman and to his left. When it crashed in the woods, the creature looked away from Annalisa for a moment, and she took that second's time to run from him into the woods, running past us only inches away. Oh no, I thought. Now this monster is going to run after her and run us right over. But he didn't. He brayed and bellowed some kind of dogman warning. Then he just sort of ran off, on his hind legs, in the opposite direction. And that was the end of that adventure. Mary Catherine and I never told Annalisa that we were there that day, and she never volunteered any information to us about Jimmy or the werewolf. She seemed to be broken up with him after that day, but never discussed it. Mary Catherine and I are still friends to this day, and we're Facebook friends with Annalisa, but we never really trusted her again after that. Why hadn't she shared with us that she was dating a werewolf? Was she jealous we'd steal him away? Personally, I prefer clean-shaven men, not dog-faced ones. Maybe she thought we'd tell the authorities and get him in trouble? Exactly what authorities do you report a werewolf to anyway? We talked about it a lot, but could never really understand the reason for her betrayal. But I guess people have trouble making sense of things once their lives become intertwined with those of the Dogman.
The Dogman of Fort Tryon Park was told to Peter Bernard, read by P.Q. Ribber. New York City is known for its urban areas such as Manhattan, yet even in Manhattan, there are places so wild that unknown creatures may occasionally at least pass through. I know this to be a fact because I saw a dogman-like creature in Fort Tryon Park in northern Manhattan. This was back 10 years ago when I first moved away from my parents and got a room in an apartment in Upper Manhattan. I was a real loner at that point in my life, and I would gravitate toward places where I could be alone to either think or stop thinking and meditate. I like natural areas and was surprised to find several just by walking around the neighborhood. Now, wild areas in an urban situation are not necessarily the same as they might be out in the country. For instance, you sometimes have to watch not to step on broken glass or even stray needles left around. It's not necessarily a safe thing to do alone, and I'm not trying to glamorize it. But I would spend a lot of time alone, wandering through wild areas in the north of the city and taking pictures on my little old Samsung flip-shot cell phone. Eventually, I discovered the wonder that is Fort Tryon Park. This place seems huge. It feels like another world. It's the home of the cloisters, an actual medieval monastery shipped to New York City brick by brick. There are other areas in Fort Tryon Park that are relatively unlandscaped, or at least they were back when I used to hang out there. There are places where you can stand and look around in 360 degrees, but never see anything created by a human or any other people either. You could film a wilderness survival movie there in the morning, then walk to McDonald's for lunch. That's why I was somewhat surprised when I was there one winter day walking through the snow, and I suddenly saw that I had company. I hadn't even seen any other tracks in the snow beside my own for most of my trek that day, so I was a bit startled. I never felt so nervous about seeing someone else in the park before, but I remember having to tell myself to calm down. I started walking toward the person who I could only make out the silhouette of as he was between some trees off in the distance. He didn't seem to have noticed me yet. Feeling paranoid, I hid myself behind a tree and watched the other guy as I saw him in profile, bent over, messing with some bush. I could see that he had a backpack on, which I thought was a strange thing to see in that context. I got out my binoculars and started trying to locate him in them. When I did, he stood, and everything from his chest up went out of view behind some tree branches and leaves. It looked like he was wearing pants, but not a shirt. The backpack was nothing of the kind. It was a humped or hunched back, covered by a huge mane of dark hair. Or maybe fur. My first thought was Bigfoot. But then I remembered that Bigfoot does not wear pants. Maybe he does in the city, some part of my mind answered back. I remember feeling a bit dizzy in an ill sort of way. Something really messed up was happening. Maybe he was an insane furry. He must have been freezing. Maybe it was someone filming a monster movie, or maybe it was a psycho on drugs in half a Bigfoot costume that was about to kill me. Terrified as I was, I wanted one closer view of this Bigfoot to see if that was really what I thought it was. I wanted a picture of it so I could maybe tell later what I had seen. I foolishly took a step out of the bushes and the creature turned and clearly saw me. At first it froze, and so did I. I remember thinking, oh, now I blew it. Bigfoot is timid. It'll run away now. But that's when the Bigfoot did something that completely blew my mind. It emerged from the cover of the forest. I could see now from its knees to the top of its pointed ears on top of its dog-shaped head. This was not a Sasquatch at all. This was a werewolf. My first impression, and the impression that lasts all these years, is that this creature was wearing pants, but not a shirt, like the Hulk, but furrier. I've heard accounts of Dogman encounters, more recently, in which people got that same first impression, that when they got a better look, they saw that the clothes they thought they saw was actually matted fur. Sometimes those people also report what might be mange on the creature. This dog-headed monkey man looked very healthy. I did not see any bald patches in his fur. In the years since then, every time I tell this story, people ask me why I didn't snap a picture. The thought completely left my head as soon as that thing looked at me. I don't know if it was fear or if it psychically told me not to take a picture, but I didn't. Then people pressed me for details about the appearance of the creature. I've honestly spent much more time recounting the story than I spent living through it, that I'm not 100% sure anymore about which details are from my original memories. I'd not stopped to study the creature. I was terrified of it and almost immediately began to run. So all of the information I took in was in about maybe 5 to 10 seconds of time total once it had emerged from the forest. If I had it to live over, I would have braced myself to study the creature more intently, and especially to be more certain that I was actually seeing pants on his legs and not an optical illusion. Maybe I just assumed pants were there. Maybe its coloring was darker on its legs and that made it look like pants to me in the dim light. Or maybe it was actually a hairy dogman creature walking through the snow in Fort Tryon Park in its fashionably ripped jeans. This was New York City, after all. I know it had pointed ears on top because I remember thinking it was wider than Batman. It had a Batman-shaped silhouette, but this thing was more muscular and taller than I would think of Batman being. It was like if Batman, the Hulk, and Wolverine had a baby with Bigfoot. Because of the immensity of it and the angry nature of it, I was more impressed by the sense of ferocity and danger it projected than any specific details of its appearance. I had never been so scared in all my life. My stomach sank, and I felt like that was my last day on Earth. And then my shocked reverie was interrupted as the creature bellowed at me. That was all I could take as I turned and ran like a coward. I remember not caring that my bladder emptied as I ran. I remember not caring that I was weeping for my mother as I ran and fell and got up and ran some more. I remember caring a great deal that I could hear the monster growling from somewhere behind me. Was it pursuing me? Was it about to leap on me? I was too scared to look behind. I was only focused on watching what was in front of me so that I could run over, around, under, or through whatever obstacle was there. I remember the hateful and disgusted look in the eyes of the creature, the last thing I saw before running from it. I remember feeling entirely abandoned by the universe. I remember feeling the creature's loathing soaking into me, as though it were soy sauce and I were tofu. The look in those eyes said I was nothing but prey. All those years I'd spent studying, practicing, learning, just so I could end up lunch for a monster that shouldn't even exist. I felt sorry for myself and sniveled and retreated. I ran, crying like a baby, assuming I wouldn't be fast enough to get away. Yet, somehow I was. Somehow, I survived the incident. Maybe the dogman let me. Maybe he was standing there laughing at me the whole time. All I know is I wasn't ready to die that day, and I did not behave in a way that I am proud of. If I were the dogman, I would have laughed at me as well. Since that day, I have adopted a new philosophy. The dogman is my instructor. Really, I live my life knowing that impossible things like dogman are very possible. I live my life knowing that I could be dead in the next instant. I live my life in acceptance of that. I no longer am surprised when bad things happen or when life-threatening events occur. I now expect them and live in great bliss whenever they don't occur. I owe this all to Dogman. It's perhaps true that Dogman might be an evil entity. It's certainly true that the one I met did not like human beings at all. But the most threatening figures in our lives are often the most important teachers. And that is the true story of how I was taught the Zen of Dogman. Dogman Ice Skating Incident, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by P.Q. Ribber. My grandmother, on my father's side, used to tell a lot of what my mother called tall stories. She'd let some drinks loosen her tongue, then tell us about movie stars who desperately tried to date her, or millionaires who begged her to get married, but my favorite of all her stories was the one she least liked to tell. That was a story about how when Grandma was a teenager, she went ice skating on a local frozen pond. And then, out of nowhere, she and some of the other girls got the attention of an actual, real-life dogman. My mother and father didn't believe this story any more than Grandma's other legendary epic anecdotes, but I did. She didn't brag when she told this one. She had to be begged to tell it, and you could see that remembering the incident left her uncomfortable. I'd have to ask her questions while she told it to slow it down. She'd try to speed through. She couldn't wait until it was over so she could tell some showbiz story instead. Why would she make up a story that pained her so much to tell? This had to be a true story. I'll retell it as well as I can to the best of my memory. I haven't heard it since I was a kid. I guess this would have happened in the late 1940s or early 1950s. Grandma died in 2000 at the age of 70, so that would have meant that the story happened when she was a teenager or in her early 20s. She was still unmarried. She didn't marry Grandpa until she was, I think, 24 or 25, which was old for marriage in those days. Grandma was a flirt till the day she died, when I saw her flirting with one of the young doctors in her hospital room. I'm certain she went to the frozen pond that day looking to socialize with men as much as she was going for some exercise. The way she described the scene was that there were a group of girls skating and another group of boys, and both were too timid to skate with each other. She said that she would try to skate alongside various boys, but they all sped up or slowed down to avoid her. She wondered why they didn't like her. Then a handsome young man skated up alongside her and informed her that all his buddies were too timid to skate with her. Not him, though, because he was brave. Soon enough, Grandma had separated the brave one from the crowd and made off to sit with him on a log by the forest alongside the frozen pond. They were conversating, to put it in her vernacular, and managing to keep each other warm on a cold day, when suddenly there came a crashing from the woods and a horrible shout. Appearing so suddenly it was almost as though he had materialized, there stood what Grandma insisted was a wild werewolf. I asked her, what is the difference between a werewolf and a wild werewolf? She said the wild werewolves never bother to turn into humans, and they don't care about the customs of man, such as wearing clothing or using fire. It sounds to me like she was describing what we now call Dogman. I had always visualized it walking out of the forest on its hind legs, but one time when Grandma told the story, she mentioned that it walked out, then stood up. So it appeared suddenly and almost magically, walking out on all fours, then stood up to its full height, which Grandma never specified. She called it a giant at points, though, so I can only imagine it must have been well over 6 feet when standing up. Now, some of you might be wondering if Grandma saw a bear that day. I don't think so, because when Grandma told that story, she was always sitting in her house by her fireplace, which had the mounted head of a bear over it. I don't remember if it was a black bear or a brown bear. I just remember it was large, dark, terrifying, and I sure hoped it was really dead. I would have nightmares about that thing being alive and trying to come through the wall and bite me. One time I told that to Grandma, who laughed and said the thing she saw was 10 times as terrifying as a bear because it possessed savagery and it possessed intelligence. So, Grandma and her new brave beau sat there staring at this intelligent dog that stood on its hind legs and glared at them. This was in broad daylight, mind you. Grandma says time just froze, and she looked this thing all over. It was more muscular than the muscle man at the circus, but it had a dog head. She never described the legs. I'm not sure she noticed the legs or feet. She would sometimes call the monster it and other times call it he. I remember asking why she thought it was a male, and she looked confused. Grandma admitted she didn't know for sure it was a male, but the chest did not look like that of a female dog. It looked like the fur-covered chest of a human bodybuilder. The main thing she remembered was that the creature was looking right at them, and he was looking very angry. He made one step toward them, and they both took off, skating across the pond in the direction of the town, screaming, "Monster!" at the top of their lungs. Grandma said she skated clear across the pond and sat quickly on a rock on the other side, desperately trying to get the skates off her boots so she could run home. She heard screams and looked back in the direction she had come. The huge wolf was on the ice now, chasing a group of girls from left to right in Grandma's field of vision. She says he was trying to move forward on two legs, attempting to grab the girls up in its arms. However, it kept losing balance and falling to all fours, where it tried to grab the girls in its massive jaws. Grandma said it was anything but graceful once it got on the ice. It had its claws out and was essentially skating on them, but its arms and legs flailed in all directions, and it kept failing to outmaneuver the girls. Grandma says she noticed her brave Bo getting his skates off and running away, leaving her there. I guess there are all different kinds of bravery in life. That's another reason I think this story is true. Grandma's stories never included guys running away from her, only toward her. Grandma says she'll never forget the sight of this animal, which she said was twice the size of some of the younger skaters, chasing kids this way and that way on the ice, then sliding off the edge of the pond and crashing into trees or rocks or snow. Kids were crying. Some were trying to run home with their ice skates still on. There was bedlam everywhere she looked. Right after Grandma had her skates off, she saw a young girl fall, face first, on the ice near the shore. She was hurt and crying. Then Grandma saw that the dog man had seen the girl fall too. Before she could think, Grandma says she was running toward the girl, and the dog man was sliding and skating over the ice toward both of them. She said as soon as she started running, she knew it was a stupid decision, but she was committed to it already. Reaching the shoreline, Grandma planned to arrest her forward momentum, grab the girl, pull her on shore, and run faster than a giant wild werewolf out of there. She accomplished the first, managing not to fall on the ice. She tried to grab the girl, who was face down crying, by the back of her jacket. The girl, however, freaked out and screamed when Grandma touched her. Time slowed down for Grandma, and the monster dog man was heading toward them from 2 o'clock. She needed a new plan. They could never outrun the thing. They had to avoid it, move out of its path of momentum. Grandma says she fought the girl off and grabbed her by both arms. Then she flung herself and the girl sideways to her right. They both landed in the snow as, inches away, the dog man flew by, narrowly missing them. She and the girl watched as the huge creature hit the snowy shore, tumbling and rolling into a patch of trees, knocking down at least 2 of the smaller ones. Grandma says the girls started to thank her, but she was out of there, running before she heard her finish. I remember asking, "That's the whole story?" And I remember Grandma answering, "Dear heavens, child, isn't that enough?" I guess, putting myself in her place, for me, that probably would have been too much. And that's my grandmother's dogman ice skating story. The end. on. Don't go away. We've got a story coming up about a cryptid so strange, we're hoping you can tell us what it is. Say then, if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279. The Dr. Smith Cryptid Encounter, or the Crow-Kata, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. If you've ever seen the old 1960s Lost in Space television program, then you remember the bumbling comic relief character Dr. Smith. He was cowardly, he was greedy, and he was always good for a few laughs. Not the pretty lady from the new version, not Gary Oldman. I mean the creepy old man Dr. Smith from TV, as played by Jonathan Harris. Now imagine, you're alone in a forest, in the dark, in the winter, lost and trying to find your way home. Then suddenly you hear the unmistakable voice of Dr. Smith calling your name. That happened to me, and trust me, it's something you don't ever want to hear. Comedy relief, out of context, can be really creepy. It was early 1968, I think, or 69. I was either 8 or 9 years old, and I guess my sister was 13 or 14. My father was employed at a factory. He would work through the holidays to make overtime pay. Then we'd take our Christmas vacation in either January or February, whenever he could get the days off. He'd always drive us up to our great-uncle's small house in the woods, which was quite different from Elmhurst, where we lived. This arrangement was fine as far as my sister and I were concerned. We'd get off school for the holidays, then Dad would take us out of classes to go off on another holiday in the woods that might last 2 weeks or longer. The teachers would give Mom our homework and assignments in advance, and she'd let us do it at our own pace. My sister would spend most of the first week studying and finish her homework early. Then she'd play the rest of the time there. Me, I'd save it all to the last 2 or 3 days. We both nearly always ended up with a B+ average, so our parents let us each do things our own unique way. About the only bad thing about our great-uncle's place was that there was very little TV reception. We could barely get one local station, and we couldn't watch my favorite show, Lost in Space. I was a red-headed kid named Will. Yes, that is my real name. And the show was about a red-headed kid also named Will, who went on adventures in outer space with a robot and the queer old duck I already mentioned named Dr. Smith. I love the robot, but each week I kept hoping that Dr. Smith would really get lost in space. He was a creep. In fact, he was the only reason they got lost in space in the first place, because he sabotaged their ship. He so obviously always made the wrong decision every time that even as a little kid you were screaming at the television, "No, Dr. Smith, no!" As an adult, I can see what a great comedic villain he was, but as a kid, I just found him frustrating. My sister, on the other hand, only watched the show to see Dr. Smith, who she thought was the star of the show. When we played Lost in Space at my great-uncle's house, she would always want to play Dr. Smith. She didn't want to play the robot, and she didn't want to play Judy or Penny. She wanted to play Dr. Smith. I was Will, of course. I had no choice but to play Will according to kid logic. So a typical game might start out with Me as well, suggesting to my sister that we study the botany on this winter planet we'd landed the Jupiter 2 on. It was usually snowy around there when we would visit, so we called it the winter planet. Anyway, my sister, as Dr. Smith, would protest that she had a bad back and that I should go on ahead of her, studying the local flora while she went inside and read a book by the fire. Then we'd have to argue for a while before she'd come with me. But she would be shouting, the pain," periodically along the way. It was very annoying. After a few days of it that year, I put my foot down and insisted she had to play someone other than Dr. Smith or I was going to quit. She called me a pusillanimous popinjay and mocked me, so I ran off into the woods, crying. I was angry, hurt, and feeling very sorry for myself, so I didn't really notice all the time that was passing or what direction I had been heading in. It dawned on me after a while that I was growing cold, and I was beginning to feel the first pangs of hunger. Looking about myself, I became alarmed that I noticed no landmarks, and nothing seemed at all familiar. The sun was nearly overhead, so I knew it was around noon, but I couldn't tell direction from that. I stopped and listened, and it was remarkably quiet in the way that only winter in nature can be. It took a while of just standing there, being as quiet as I could, and listening. But eventually I heard what I took to be the shushing of a car on the highway. I knew that road was east of the house, so I was beginning to get my bearings back and started walking in the general direction I figured the house would be. After what felt like 20 minutes or more, I realized I hadn't seen my own or anyone else's footprints in the snow for some time. I might be headed toward the house, or I might be heading off into the middle of nowhere. That's when I heard it.
Will, oh dear heavens, where are you, my boy?
It was my sister quietly calling me, or more precisely, it was my sister doing Dr. Smith calling me, sounding frightened and cowardly, the way he always sounded on television.
Will, oh dear heavens, where are you, my boy?
The same exact cry. With a great sense of relief, I headed in the direction of the voice as quietly as I could manage. I had hopes of catching up with her from behind and scaring her. That way, I'd get even with her for picking on me earlier. After a while, I stopped walking because I was no longer sure which direction the voice came from. Then, the doctor spoke again.
The pain.
Off I headed toward the latest utterance of the doctor.
Will, oh dear heavens, where are you, my boy?
He sounded closer now. I mean she. Seemed like she was just on the other side of that row of evergreens. I snuck up to the trees in my best late 60s ninja style. I could see that there was someone moving on the other side. Inspired, I reached down and quietly rolled a nice hard snowball to make the surprise even more surprising. It was all I could do to keep from giggling out loud when I leaned through the fir branches, gazing around, looking for my sister. I didn't see her. I did see this other thing. It was like a dog, a very, very large dog. It was striped like a Tasmanian tiger, but much larger, like the size of a Great Dane, or even bigger, but bulky and striped. My father told me that sometimes bear might be in the area and coyote. All I wanted right then was to be back inside, telling him that he had left giant striped wolf off the wildlife list. I dropped my snowball and walked as quickly and quietly as I could in a different direction. Now, I wasn't sure where I was headed, and there was a large predator in the area. I was crying, and the tears were freezing on my face. My breath froze to my upper lip, and my sweat froze in every part of my body. It was terrified. The only thing I could think of was my great-uncle's house and how if I could get back there, I'd never go out again. I prayed that I was heading in the correct direction. Then I heard it, from back in the direction of the huge wolf thing.
Will, oh dear heavens, where are you, my boy?
It was the Dr. Smith voice. My idiot sister was still playing the game. She didn't get it that we were in danger. She must not have seen the monster dog. I shouted her name out at the top of my lungs. I raced back toward the large creature, knowing I might be putting my life at risk. I had to get back to her before that animal did. Then I heard my name again, but not in the Dr. Smith voice, in my sister's. "Will, where are you, dimwit?" And it was not coming from the direction I was running to, or the direction I was running from. It came from my left. There she was. I could see her off in the distance, and the house was right there behind her. I ran as fast as I could toward them until I had a sharp cramp in my side and had to rest before running some more. During my second rest, I looked behind me and saw the head of the beast emerging from the woods. I remember all pain disappearing, and I remember warming myself by the fire later on. Any other detail about what happened between those two moments has not been retained by my conscious memory. I'm the only one who saw the dog, but nobody acted like I was making the story up. My mother said we weren't allowed to play outside without her or Dad watching us anymore, but that was a moot point to me. I never wanted to be outside at that place ever again. After telling my story to everyone, it was my sister who first made the connection between the voice and the dog. She said it wasn't her doing Dr. Smith out there in the woods, so it must have been the dog. That totally freaked me out, that there could be dogs who imitated humans in the way a parrot does. Maybe it didn't know what it was saying, but it just liked the sound of what it was saying. Or maybe, and this is the idea that gives me the creeps about all this, maybe this dog animal imitates humans in order to draw one of us away from our pack or tribe. Once it gets us alone, maybe we're easier to hunt. Recently, I was watching an old episode of a Lost in Space on TV, and I thought of this weird thing that happened to me as a kid. It's almost like the memory of a fever dream. Back then, I had this feeling that eventually I would understand what had happened that winter, and it would all make sense. Now it's literally almost 60 years ago, and it's a bigger mystery to me than it was back then. I did an internet search to see if what I saw fits the profile of any known or mythological creature, and I did find out about something from Ethiopia called the crocata, or the korokata. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. This is a large half-wolf and half-dog entity who can imitate the voices of humans in order to attract them before killing and eating them. I don't want to reveal exactly where my story took place, but it was definitely not in Ethiopia. It was in upstate New York. How a mythical Ethiopian dog could be wandering the winter forests of the northeastern United States, I could not guess. Maybe it was some other kind of giant wolf creature that imitates humans. All I know is this. If you're walking through the freezing dark winter woods alone, and creepy old Dr. Smith calls your name, do not, and I repeat, do not, as in never, answer.
Dogman Diner, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. There is a diner in New Jersey that I don't want to name because I don't think they would want to be associated with Dogman. It's a very nice place, and I would recommend it to any of you if you're in the area. You can probably figure out where I mean if you really want to, but if you do, please don't bother the management or workers about this. What happened to me could very well have been a one-time occurrence, and it's quite feasible that the Dogman might never pass that way again. I would definitely return to the diner if I were back in that state, because the chances of something like that happening twice would probably be smaller than the chances of lightning striking twice in the same location. So this story happened when I used to live in New York back sometime in the mid or late 1990s. I had a girlfriend I was living with, and we were going through a kitsch phase. We wanted to go on the road and see whatever roadside attractions were still left out there. We rented a car, and we were going to take the train back, and one of our first stops was this particular diner. It's been around since World War II, but when we visited, it still sparkled like it was brand new. It really did feel a bit like stepping back in time. We got there fairly late in the afternoon, so we had to eat quickly as they close at, I think, 5 or 6. We got some sandwiches to go and went and sat in the car, relaxing, unwinding, eating, and talking about our trip as we watched the sun go down in the diner's parking lot. Now, this diner is located off the highway in front of a patch of trees. I looked on a map, and it seems to be a small patch of trees, then a road, then a much larger patch of trees or a small forest. I didn't know that at the time, which might have led to some of my confusion about what was to happen next. I saw a light moving in the forest. It was colored blue. My girlfriend saw it too. In fact, I can't remember if she saw it first or if I did, but we both grew increasingly weirded out by it, and she started saying it was a UFO. I thought she was joking. It was probably a flashlight. Someone was walking around with a weird flashlight in the woods. It got me a little scared, and I was thinking maybe we should get back to driving or find a hotel or something. My girlfriend had a very different idea, though. She wanted to get a closer look at the UFO. Before I could even object, she was off and trotting toward the forest as we thought it was at the time. She didn't even lock her door. I had to lock both before I could run after her. We didn't have cell phones or anything like that back then. We were just two people alone by a closed diner running toward who knew what. So I caught up to her as she stopped to catch her breath, about 50 feet or so into the woods, maybe a little more. We were both gathering our breath and thoughts to say to each other when something was screaming at us and running toward us from deeper in the woods. It was not a light or a person carrying a light. It was some kind of hairy, man-shaped creature, and it was closing on us very quickly. Turning our tails and racing back to our rented car, my girlfriend got back first and couldn't get in. Then she started cursing me for locking her door. It had seemed the smart thing to do at the time, though. So I got in and opened her door. She closed it just as the hairy man from the woods slammed face first into our windshield. He didn't seem to be familiar with glass, and looked quite surprised at this nearly invisible force field we possessed. Now we had a good look at our pursuer from inches away. This was not a hairy man. This was a dog-headed man. A savage, prehistoric kind of man with a dog or wolf head. I remember it being brown and black, very dark, and not really colored like any dog or wolf I had ever seen before. Its snout was longer than a pug, but shorter than a Doberman. Its eyes were very animal-like, not human at all. I remember them being greenish-yellow, but maybe it had something to do with the lights from the highway, because I've never read of people saying Dogman had green eyes in all the years I've been reading about this creature. Back then, neither of us had ever heard of a dog that walked like a man on its hind legs, so we were both kind of in shock. Then, it occurred to me that maybe we should get out of there. So I started the engine, and sort of zombie-like, I drove out of there. I remember my girlfriend screaming at me, and I don't blame her. She was just trying to wake me up because my reaction to this had been to become a bit stunned. So the end result was that we got a little slobber on our windshield and we got an aerobic workout, but it took me a while to get over being a bit shaky outside near the woods at night. So for the next few years that the two of us stayed together, we referred to that incident as the time we saw a rabid dog. We knew it probably wasn't actually rabid, but we meant it was some kind of ill or brain-damaged, crazy, enraged beast that ran on its hind legs as part of that stage of its illness. I don't know where we came up with that theory, but it was our internal myth to try to explain our experience. I don't know how many years later it was when I heard a podcast with Linda Godfrey, and the whole world of Dogman stories opened up to me. I hadn't really considered looking for stories like my own back then. I just thought this was a one-time event. But anyway, maybe there's a reason why that diner closes at 5, and maybe we were extra foolish to hang around till after dark and then run into the woods of New Jersey. My only regret, though, after all these years, is this. We never did find out what that strange light was.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
The Dogman that challenged my German Shepherd, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When I was in my 20s, I had a great dog named Bessie who guarded our house for us. She was very fit and athletic and friendly, but she would turn absolutely savage in the case of someone trying to get on our property who didn't belong there. I never saw her back down from a fight, except for this one time I'm going to tell you about. The time when Bessie got challenged to a fight by an actual dogman. That house had a small to medium-sized backyard surrounded by woods. We had no fence, but I would let Bessie out into the yard and let her play. She would do her business by bushes and cover it up, but she would never venture any further into the forest than that. She was a really smart and loyal dog, and we had a close and trusting relationship. So one night when she was outside and I was inside, I heard her barking in the backyard. She sounded angry, but also alarmed. I didn't like to hear Bessie's alarmed bark. I had really only heard it 2 times before, I guess. One time when a pack of coyotes were checking us out from the woods, and another time when a bear stumbled upon our yard. Or maybe the bear story happened after this, I can't remember for sure. I think Bessie would have been around 3 or 4 when this story happened. She was quite fit, and although she had never been violent, I had no idea she could be if she were defending me or our property. So I rushed to get outside, wanting to shoo whatever it was away before something unfixable got broken. When I got outside, I didn't have to wait long to find out what was causing the trouble. Standing right there, in front of the wood line, staring down at my furiously barking dog, was another dog. guess. I mean, it sure looked like a dog head was on its body. The trouble was that its body didn't resemble a dog's body very much at all. I wondered if it was a guy in a costume, but it was too tall to be that. And the head seemed so real. Its ears moved the way a dog's ears would move, but its body was like a very, very tall, somewhat chubby man. It had long, shaggy fur all over, including on top of its head, where it flopped all over, covering its ears and eyes. Although my dog was extremely agitated, the immense standing man-beast just stood there with his tongue out, panting like any other dog would do, and watching my German Shepherd casually. The détente in the situation changed rapidly as Bessie lurched forward and took a nip out of the man-dog's front paw. First, the giant beast squealed in pain, sounding like a puppy, much smaller than itself, and it pulled back. Then, in a quick second, it got furious and roared at Bessie, taking a bite at my dog at the end of the roar, but missing. For the only time in her life, Bessie turned tail and ran. She ran right past me toward the house, and I realized I'd better get to the door to let both of us in. The dogman was running after us, and I could see how long its strides were by how quickly it covered the distance from those trees to our back porch. We got in literally seconds before the creature reached our door. I ran away after locking it, fully expecting the creature to break the door down and come in to end everything for me in my own home. But that's not what the dogman did. It sat down outside our back door and scratched at the door, like he was asking to be let in. I did not let him in. I ran up to my bedroom. I tried to find a window with a view looking down on the back door of the house so I could monitor what the creature did, but none of our upstairs windows had a good angle. So I just got quiet and I listened. I didn't hear anything happen for a long time, and eventually I realized the man-dog had left at some point. When? I don't know. The next day or sometime after that, I got a tape measure to find out the height of this one branch I saw the creature stand next to, and it was 8 feet 2 inches. That seems impossibly tall. So maybe it was just an optical illusion from my angle that his head was the same height as that branch. But even if I'm off, that creature was much larger than an average man. Because of its shagginess, I don't really know if it was muscular. The fur made it look kind of round, but the front arms were clearly very strong, and the hind legs even stronger. Vince McMahon would have signed this guy to a lifetime contract in a second. It was the biggest man I'd ever seen or expect to ever see. And even though it looked friendly when it stood there panting, when it went for my dog, that was not play. It had the biggest teeth I've ever seen in my life, and they were clearly the teeth of a hunter, not a vegetarian. My dog and I are lucky we escaped unharmed from our encounter with the dogman that challenged my German Shepherd. Thursday's dogman has far to go, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. One time, my wife and I drove cross-country delivering goods in an 18-wheeler. But when I say one time, I mean one time, because we quit immediately upon delivering our cargo. And the reason we walked out after only one delivery, believe it or not, was Dogman. We were doing it as a favor for a buddy who was too sick to make the trip. He supervised the packing or whatever had to be done. We just showed up at the last minute, got in, and drove off. I had a list of what was supposed to be in the back, but I hadn't inspected it myself, and neither had my wife. We weren't taking things too seriously, as this wasn't our job. It was just a favor we were doing for a friend. We had been driving for about 7 hours when it sounded like something fell in the back. My wife asked me if the truck was supposed to be making noises like that. I replied honestly that I didn't know. We both kind of hoped someone else could deal with it once we got to our destination, but that wasn't supposed to be for another 2.5 days. We both got tired at the same time, so I pulled off the highway for us to both get naps. We couldn't sleep though, because something in the back was still making noise, even after we had stopped driving. That couldn't possibly be anything good. It's a raccoon, my wife guessed. There was an extra loud crash from the rear, and she changed her guess to a really large raccoon. We both knew we had to get out of the truck and go investigate, but neither of us wanted to do it, so we both pretended we didn't hear the noise and tried to go back to sleep. Eventually we couldn't deal with it at all, so we got out and walked to the back to open up. Now, we must have been really tired not to call law enforcement or someone like that to be with us when we opened the truck up. After all, it could have been a bear, or it could have been a serial killer for all we knew. But we didn't think of that. I guess we were both expecting a really large raccoon to stroll out wearing a top hat, thanking us for our kindness in releasing him. I really can't understand how we could have been so dumb as to open it up with no protection at all. Neither of us were armed in any way. I mean, I had my Swiss Army knife, but I left it back in the truck. So anyway, we unlocked the truck, which took us a while to figure out. As soon as we did, the doors flew open, knocking both of us to the ground. Out flew a man-shaped thing unlike any creature either of us had ever seen before or even heard of. It was the size of a very tall man, extremely tall, maybe even 7 feet. It had lots of muscles all over, but it was not wide. I guess it was built like a basketball player, except it had dog-like back legs and a tail. Looking at this thing from behind, the only thing I could think to say was, "What?" The beast turned around when I spoke and walked over to me on its hind legs like a really evil-looking man. When it was facing me, I could see that it had a wolf's head, but brown all over. It had tall, wolf-like ears, but the eyes didn't look like any kind of eyes I had seen before. They were yellow and seemed to glow in the dark as I laid on my butt, staring up at him. I'm pretty certain it was a male, although I don't remember seeing any specific parts of him that made me think that. We both perceived it as male. The entire body was covered in hair, about as long as a German shepherd's fur, but the tail was bushier. Whereas a normal wolf can seem kind of majestic, this thing seemed awkward and evil somehow. It glared around at everything and wobbled back and forth, almost falling over. It stumbled over to me, and I thought it was going to fall on me, so I backed up as quickly as I could. The creature leaned forward and growled right in my face, swaying back and forth and back and forth, making me feel as sick as he looked. I could smell his breath, and it didn't smell nice. I was crying and thought something terrible was about to happen, but my wife threw something at it and got its attention drawn away from me. She was shouting something, but I was too freaked out to even be listening to her. The dog thing took a step toward her, Then suddenly and with no warning, he bolted across the street and into the woods, back in the direction we had come from. I thought about how long we had been driving, and I realized he had a long way to go. But if he's really a canine, I bet he did eventually find his way back. After getting me to my feet and hugging me for a while, my wife closed the back up. We got back in the truck and locked the doors. We needed to sit there for a while and comprehend what just happened. How had that thing gotten into the truck in the first place? We delivered what was left of the goods and just told them the story honestly and exactly as it had happened. Only, we told them that it was dark, so we couldn't really get a clear look at the animal. Maybe it was a wolf, we said, but we couldn't be certain. From the evidence in the truck, this had been the work of some kind of animal, not a human. Whoever the guy was we had to fill out forms for at the destination told us it was probably a young bear. We nodded at his sage suggestion. Yes, it must have been that. Years later, I saw a TV show about Dogman, and I called my wife in to see it. She immediately thought the same thing I did. That was what was in the truck that night. It was a Dogman. And after listening to the story that was on the television show, I have to say I think we were incredibly lucky that that thing was more concerned with getting home than with eating two unarmed amateur truckers for dinner. So Dogman, if you're out there listening, thanks for the favor, good buddy. In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo, and it says Scary Stories underneath in the kaiju monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors, such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. The Dogman at the end of the road. As told to and read by Peter Bernard. So, my wife left me 3 weeks before my retirement. I had planned since I was 23 years old to retire with my wife, and I thought she had been planning along with me. I thought we were soulmates, and I thought our lives were about to get a whole lot more fun. Then, she introduced me to her new lover. It was a friend of mine. Someone I had introduced to her. They both asked me to wish them well and said they were leaving. Then they were gone. 2 weeks and 6 days to go before my retirement. I had spent my whole life preparing for something that was never going to happen. Not because of fate, not because of illness or injury, but because the person I spent my life taking care of really didn't find me interesting and didn't see a problem dumping me after almost 43 years. The days stretched slowly until my retirement. They gave me a watch. Everyone told me to go have fun with my wife now. I had done my time at the salt mine. I had done my time. Now I had nothing but time and nothing to do. I walked to the train station, same as usual. I realized with a jolt that this would be the final time. I had no reason to come back to Manhattan after this. I got on my train to go home, and I got off a couple of stops early. Going home would be a farce. I had done my time as I had been told. I had nothing more to contribute to society and no more ability to pay for and protect another person. Nobody had any more reason to care whether I lived or died. For me me to go home and pretend to still be a fully functioning human would be less than comical. It would be pathetic. I got off the train and sat on a bench. Opening my briefcase, I looked for anything that had my name on it. Stationery, a pen, notes I had handwritten that now no longer would ever matter again. I threw them all in the wastebasket next to me, wishing I could join them in extinction at the bottom of the tin box. There was some stuff in the briefcase that somebody might find useful, so I left it open and took a step or two away. Then I remembered and walked back. Emptying my pockets of money, I dropped it all in the briefcase. A young lady walked by slowly. She was extremely overweight, and I instantly felt bad for her. She wore thick, ugly glasses and a mismatching outfit. I thought surely she must be afflicted with mental problem. Feeling deeply and empathizing with everyone around me at that moment, I offered her the briefcase. She stopped walking and looked at me with disgust. I took off my watch, the new gold watch the company had just given me, and I dropped it on top of the pile of money and papers in the briefcase. "Well, if you don't want it, feel free to give it to someone else," I said as I walked past her. She pulled back exaggeratedly in horror and shouted, "Don't touch me, you pig!" And I just shook my head. The entire world has become brain damaged. Or else I've become brain damaged. Either way, I don't belong here, and so I knew it was time to go. I proceeded down the platform toward the stairs. I could hear the portly powerhouse behind me screaming that she needed security and that she was being attacked. I went down the few stairs and found myself on the ground next to the train tracks. Looking in both directions first, I walked all the way across the track field and past the platform heading back into the city. There, I found the entrance to a forest in front of me, and I eagerly walked inside. I don't know what I was looking for or where I was going. Maybe I was in search of Eden or paradise or hell, but I wasn't trying to end my life in a literal sense. I guess I needed to be any place but near people, and I needed to start over or die in the process of trying. The idea of going home and spending the rest of my life alone, either doing the things my wife and I had planned to do, or else not doing anything at all, it filled me with self-pity, and I knew I didn't want to live out my remaining years as that guy. Thinking back on it, I guess it was kind of my second rite of passage moment. You know how teenagers sometimes can live a bit recklessly? It goes back to ancient times. It's in the human blood. Before you can actually become an adult, you need some kind of rite of passage, and it's got to be something where you are put at risk. You don't go through a rite of passage in a safe space. You go through it when you have no choice, and you come out the other end stronger than you went in, or you literally die trying. In some old cultures, rites of passages did sometimes kill the young people involved in them, just as hazing accidents sometimes kill young people in rites of passage even into modern times. Well, maybe it's not just something that happens because you're that age. Maybe it's something that might happen again in your life, or might even happen over and over again. Maybe it's about achieving adulthood in different ways each time, or maybe some of us just need to keep being reminded to act like adults. In any case, this felt like a rite of passage to me. become worthwhile in some new way, find some way to feel self-esteem again, or else leave yourself for wildlife to feed on. Live a life of purpose and value, or get out of the way so someone else can instead. That was how I felt. So I walked into the forest, and I walked into the forest, and I walked into the forest. Then I got hungry, and I realized I didn't have any food on me. I looked around to get my bearings and saw that I had walked halfway up a mountain, and I could see down onto the train station and the town surrounding it. Was there a restaurant open any place I could see? Then I remembered. I left my money in the briefcase at the station. I still had my credit cards and bank cards in my pocket, though. That was my stomach saying that. No, my head overruled my stomach. The woman I loved my entire life had just slapped me in the face and made a joke out of every single action I had taken during every single second of my adult life. Why go back in shame to her society and beg for food? Her society thought so little of me. If my wife didn't like me, just imagine how the rest of them must feel. No, I needed to stay away from people until I could feel better about myself. It's unhealthy to be around people who think you are worthless. And at that point, I felt like it was very likely that everyone thought that about me, or they would if they knew what my wife had done. So, I marched through the forest, looking for anything that might be edible there, right where I was. I found a stream and I fell right into it, drinking and drinking. It was the best tasting water I ever had. It made my stomach stop growling for a minute, but only for a minute. This was early August in New Jersey, and I found a blueberry bush growing surprisingly near the water. The berries were ripe, and I was stunned that no other wildlife had eaten them before me. It felt like maybe I had some place in the grand scheme of things after all. What were the chances of finding this bush, or of the berries being so perfectly ripe and delicious? My stomach stopped hurting, but I could still hear it growling. Why was it growling? Were these berries really poison and making me sick? If so, then why had the pain gone away in my belly? I didn't feel sick. Then, the sound of growling moved out to my right side, and I realized it was not my stomach growling at all, but something else. Turning quickly, I saw a man my size emerge from behind a tree. I'm just under 6 feet tall. The man seemed to be wearing a grayish-brown mohair jumpsuit at first. I looked again and it wasn't clothes at all. It was his fur, and he was a furry man. But not like a man in a furry costume. I mean, he was a man who was furry all over. And he had the head of some kind of a proto-dog. It was not a normal dog head, not a pretty, sweet pet kind of a face. It looked like a monster from dinosaur times married a dire wolf, and this was their baby. But he stood and he walked around like a man, or like a caveman at least. It was the ugliest and most horrifying thing I had ever seen. "Do you see me?" it asked me in English but with a French accent. I don't know if it really asked that, or if I imagined it. I didn't see its mouth move. Somehow I felt as though it was surprised I could see it. I was about to answer and tell it that, well, yes, I can see you, but it screeched at me in the most ungodly way you can imagine. It made a terrifying sound and it lunged at me. It couldn't have been a costume because its fur stood on end and its eyes looked quite panicked. I turned and I ran so hard I didn't even have any idea where I was running. I ran until long after it was dark. I came out eventually on some dark street with rundown-looking houses on it. This looked even scarier than the forest. Someone was walking down the street toward me. I grew alarmed. Was I about to get mugged? It was a woman, smaller than me. She looked frightened of me and drew her purse closer as she rushed past me. I caught a reflection of myself and I realized I look like a mess. Running through the forest being chased by a dogman isn't the greatest thing for your appearance. I asked myself, how was this starting over with my life? How was this any better than sitting at home alone and wasting away? So I found my way to transportation and I used my cards and I got home. Then, over the next few months, I sold that home and I moved out west. Now, I'm in the process of starting my own small business and I'm meeting a lot of new people, both men and women. I'm hanging around people who like me and who I like. I don't have all the answers, but at least I'm back to looking for the questions. And I guess, in a way, the one I most have to thank is Dogman. Bigfoot's Cave, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When I was a kid, my father told me a story about when he was a kid and how he saw a Bigfoot on more than one occasion. He also told me the story of how his father and a few of the other local men chased the creature back to its home in a cave that ever since then our family called Bigfoot's Cave. I never saw Bigfoot, and I never heard of anyone else from my generation seeing them around that area. But apparently they were either much more common when my dad was a kid, or else the few that were around there were just a lot more visible. My father said that it was so common for the Bigfoot to watch him and his friends play that they practically ignored the creature. The only exception was that nobody would chase a ball that rolled into the woods in the direction of the Sasquatch. I know what you might be thinking. Did the Squatch ever throw the ball back to them? Well, I asked that dumb question, and my father just gave me an icy stare before returning to his story. I took that as a no. The way he almost joked around when telling me about playing with Bigfoot watching changed when he talked about the Sasquatch stealing hens from their coop. I guess my family had a chicken coop. I've never even seen a chicken coop, so I wouldn't know. But when my dad would talk about the hens being taken, his mood would turn very somber. He seemed genuinely unnerved that the creature ate meat. There was a lot of talk of organizing men to go and get this creature once it began taking their livestock. They wondered if sooner or later it might take a human too. And then it happened. Well, almost. My father was out with one of his brothers, and they were chasing each other around the barn, just roughhousing and playing around. When my dad came around the barn expecting to see his brother, instead, he caught a large, hairy man snatching his brother, who must have been 12 or 13 at the time, and running off into the woods with him, all in one lightning-fast movement. Dad screamed for his dad, and immediately they began chase. My brother said the creature dropped his brother almost immediately when he realized he was being pursued. His brother seemed unhurt and ran home screaming and crying. Grandpa and my father kept running after the creature while they were hot on its trail. He said he saw the creature make moves that no man or ape should have been able to make. It had the grace of a ballet dancer and the aggressiveness of an Olympic decathlon champ. Yet when it climbed the tall hill leading to the cave, they could keep it in eye view almost the entire way. They saw it enter the cave, and they climbed the hill after it. Gathering dry brush and branches, they built a fire at the cave entrance and attempted to smoke the creature out, but nothing emerged. They built the fire higher into a bonfire, and still nothing came out of the cave. They reasoned that there must be another exit to the cave system elsewhere and resolved to get some other men and go back in the morning. When morning came, my father found himself banned from going back to the cave by his mother overruling his father. So the rest of the story is me telling you what my father told me his father told him. My grandfather died before I was born, so I never got to hear his version of events. Okay, so the men arrived at the cave and they went inside with torches and guns. Grandpa said they heard sounds of an animal off in the distance and they kept thinking they were going to see it around the next turn, but they never did. After a while, they couldn't find any way to go further into the cave. And then they heard the sound of the animal grunts behind them. Rushing, they headed back the way they came, and on the way back, they heard a sound like a cave-in. Sure enough, there had been a cave-in right at the entrance, and the men were sealed in. Fortunately, working together through the night, the men were able to reach the other side and open an air hole, allowing them to breathe. After a period of celebration and relaxation to catch their second wind, they freed themselves from the cave and assessed their damages, which were minimal. Mostly, their pride had been hurt, as obviously they had been outsmarted by the beast. It had led them deep into the cave it knew far better than they did, and then it had escaped while they were preoccupied. A professional stage magician couldn't have used misdirection any better. The town got together and had a meeting about what to do about the hairy chicken thief. Some people had already put barbed wire around their coops, multiple locks, and other such precautions. It was decided that wasn't enough, so another group was organized to go hunt the Bigfoot. For an entire weekend, the men of the area marched fruitlessly through the woods, never encountering any creatures larger than squirrels, and never shooting anything, unless you count the one guy who accidentally shot himself in the foot. And that was pretty much that for Bigfoot in our area. Believe it or not, he seems to have moved on. Like I said, I never saw one, and I never heard from my friends about any of them seeing any. So maybe they really are a migratory animal, and maybe it was only in our area that 1 year, or maybe even for just that one season of that 1 year. Be that as it may, as I said earlier, my family called that cave Bigfoot's Cave straight up until the day we parted with the property almost 10 years ago. And that is my family's Bigfoot story. My wife thinks Bigfoot is psychic, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. My wife thinks Bigfoot is telepathic and can send her messages through the television set. She tunes into some static station. I'm not sure how she does it. I only get cable channels when I flip around. She uses 2 remotes and somehow she ends up with a full screen of static. Then she stares at it, making weird expressions, and comes away an hour or 2 later telling me all the crazy anecdotes Bigfoot shared with her that week. She's a crazy wife, but she's my crazy wife. I had a meeting with my boss and some clients, and I'd been commissioned to draw an entertaining old-fashioned pirate map based on the proposed building plans we were presenting. I'd gotten so involved with the details on the map that I had to put the original plans away for safekeeping while I was working. When I was packing up for my meeting, I completely forgot about the plans. I was actually walking out of the house when my wife called out to me, saying Bigfoot told her to remind me to bring the plans with me. I was very grateful for the reminder and thought the Bigfoot part was just a joke on her part, When I got back from the meeting, however, my wife really wanted to know what plans I'd forgotten. I thought she was finally taking an interest in my work, but no, she was insisting she was as disinterested as she had ever been. It was Bigfoot that was interested, not her. I wondered, what kind of a mental problem does a person have to have where they'll be interested in their husband's work, yet deny it and claim that a mythological creature is the actual concerned party? Why was she ashamed to be interested in me and kind to me? I was growing sick of hearing about what Bigfoot thought about things. I wanted to know what my wife thought. I took her away on a vacation to Chicago. I got us a nice hotel room. I went in to take a shower, and by the time I was done, she had already figured out how to get static on the TV set, and she was sitting tranced out in front of it, staring. I really pitched a fit. Even in Chicago, she was going to talk to imaginary Bigfoot? It wasn't just something to do in the forest. She was going to do it no matter where we went? I completely lost it, and I demanded a divorce. She hadn't realized how upset I'd been over all this, and we both cried and calmed down. When we went home, she stopped staring at the static on the TV. I thought she was coming to terms with the fact that it had all been in her imagination, that the Bigfoot had never been real. All of the messages she got from him were messages from her own subconscious. That was all. Maybe understanding this would help her put all the different parts of her personality back together again, and I would be by her side, ready to help if she needed me. I thought I had it all figured out. And then, one night, I was watching TV downstairs in the living room. We have floor-to-ceiling windows and glass doors on 2 walls in that room, and at night, we pull the shades down so people can't see inside. We have outside lights pointing toward the house, so that if anyone approaches at night from those angles, we will see their shadow cast on our curtains and know that we have company approaching. Well, on that night, the tallest shadow I had ever seen walked all the way from the left window, around the corner in front of me, then back around the other side toward where my wife was working in her office. I stood up and watched this shadow. It was the most remarkable thing I had ever seen, and I was only seeing the silhouette. It was a man, but it was not a man. I'm not really sure what else to say about it other than that. I was stunned, and I stood there for a while trying to understand what was happening. A giant man walking around the house back in the direction of my wife. Giant man walking toward my wife. I'd better go warn her. Before I could move a muscle, I heard her cry out in surprise. She did not cry out in alarm, merely in surprise. She seemed she seemed pleasantly surprised by what she saw. I ran back to her office, but she was not in there. The back door was open. I ran outside and looked around, but I didn't see her, and I didn't see whoever was casting that immense shadow either. This was 3 days ago, but I think she's going to come back. I've notified the authorities, but I don't know how hard they're looking. They all seem to think I killed her, but I didn't. She just ran off for a little fling with Bigfoot, that's all. And I wish she would get back so that people would believe me when I tell them that. It was my fault. I made her stop talking to him through the TV, so he had to come get her personally. It was my fault, but I'm not a criminal. Now everyone thinks I'm a killer. And it's all because my wife thinks Bigfoot psychic. I felt sorry for myself because I had no doorman. But then I met a man who had no scary stories, psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot paraphernalia. Did you know you could be wearing a psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot t-shirt right now? They come in white, black colors, long sleeve, short sleeve, little baby red sleeve, wife beater size, pregnant wife size. Plus, you can own a scary story, psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot hat, hoodie, journal, postcards, wall decals. All this can be yours right now by going to cafepress.com/scarystoriesnyc. Link is in the description. The icky little Goop man, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I'm not 100% certain this is a cryptid story because it might be a story about a space alien. I saw something unlike anything I'd ever seen or heard of before, but I don't know if it was an animal, a demon, an alien, or what. And I don't really know if it had intelligence, or if so, how much. It might have had an animal level of brain power, or it could have been smarter than humans, but I didn't see it do enough to figure out which was the situation in this case. Now, I'm not going to start this story by saying I saw a UFO, but I'm not going to say I didn't either. I sort of weirdly felt a UFO before all the events in this unfolded. Let me try to explain what I mean. I was sitting in my bed reading a book about ancient Egypt on my Kindle. I don't know if that matters, but it was about the time when Egypt was called Kem and was supposedly ruled over by the men who later became worshipped as the Egyptian pantheon of gods. Maybe I was in a sort of Giorgio Tsoukalos ancient aliens state of mind at the time, but when a flash of light came from outside, accompanied by an odd sort of heat or energy, I was immediately certain there was a UFO outside of my house. However, when I ran to the window to look, the flash of light and heat were entirely gone, and I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. My next thought led me to panic. Had that been an atomic blast? Was the aftershock about to hit? I couldn't see any mushroom clouds, but I decided to go out in front of the house and try to get more of a 360-degree view of my place in the world. I stood on the sidewalk, turning in circles, and still not noticing anything out of the ordinary. Eventually, my neighbor across the street came out and asked me if I was okay. I made up a story about how I thought I had seen a rare falcon, but I got outside too late to confirm the sighting. It was nonsense. I know nothing about birds. I just didn't want to say I was looking to see if a UFO had dropped an atom bomb on the neighborhood. Since then, that lady asks me questions about bird watching, so I study it. I've become fairly knowledgeable about a subject I have no interest in, just so I don't have to admit that I thought I saw a UFO. That's the world we live in, or at least that's the one I'm stuck in. So anyway, I decided that since I was out anyway, I would go out back and water my back lawn. I kept forgetting to do that, and the lawn was drying up fast. When I got to the backyard, though, there was a short, man-shaped thing standing directly in the center of the yard, wiggling. I think it was a little under 5 feet tall, maybe 4.5 feet. I couldn't tell if it was wearing clothes, as its skin seemed to resemble a kind of verdant, bubbling lava. It was semi-translucent and green, like the slime they used to have on those Nickelodeon TV shows when I was a kid. Maybe they still have it, I don't know. But this was much nastier looking, as it had in it all sorts of shades of green in its goo. It had pulsing, darker colored veins as well, just below the surface of the creature's outer covering, all over its body. The skin seemed to be constantly melting, falling down, then being reabsorbed by the feet and traveling upward only to drip off again. It was like a man, but it was also like some kind of semi-liquid fountain system as well. It looked bipedal, but I wondered if it could walk or not. It just stood there, swaying slightly, dripping. Needless to say, I was more than a little surprised. I thought about calling my neighbor over, but decided against it. My cell phone was in the house, and I couldn't take a picture of it. My mind raced, wondering what I should do. I decided to attempt to communicate. Taking a step or two forward, I spoke, telling the creature my name. It turned to me suddenly as though it had not noticed me before. Facing me, I wondered if it had eyes under all that goop. I could see now that it did have a mouth, which was wide open, apparently shocked and horrified by my appearance. It raised its hands in front of itself in a defensive posture. I held my hands up to show I was unarmed, and I took a step backward. I started telling the creature that I came in friendship, but it screamed, this high-pitched, gurgling screech. It was one of the most painful noises I'd ever experienced, and I raised my hands to cover my ears. This seemed to threaten the goopy creature, and it rose for a few seconds to being several inches taller than it had been. Then, with this disgusting sucking sound, it completely liquefied, then splashed straight down to the ground, and it seemed to melt into the dirt itself, completely disappearing in maybe 3 or 4 seconds, maybe 5. I ran over to the spot and watched the moist ground dry up before my very eyes. Was the creature burrowing further underground? Or I guess burrowing wouldn't be the right word, but was it melting itself deeper and deeper into the dirt? Was it traveling underground to another location? Rather than being a creature from outer space, could this have been a creature that actually lived under the earth? Or even in the dirt itself, since it seemed to be liquid-based in a way I don't think any other animals are. Even jellyfish, who have no skeletons, don't pass through the ground as far as I know. But could this have just been from a different ecosystem under the earth? And was the flash of light and heat somehow related to its appearing in my backyard? If I ever see the creature again, I'll let you know, but it's been a few months, and I really don't expect any sequels to that strange afternoon. Now I have to go read more about bird watching in my area. It's really annoying and boring and time-consuming, but it's my hobby now, thanks to the icky little green Goop Man.
Check out the audio podcast version of Scary Stories NYC, now available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and other popular podcatchers. Bigfoot attacked my tiny house. Scary Stories by Peter Bernard, Volume 1, now available on Amazon in paperback.
Come back for more scary stories.